I slammed my locker shut, catching sight of Edward across the hall. He was laughing. God, that laugh. It's like the sun breaking through clouds. We've been best friends since forever, and I've kept my secret hidden deep where no one would find it. Not even him. "Hey, man," Edward called out, jogging over, that easy grin plastered on his face. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual, like I wasn't replaying the way his hair fell into his eyes when he ran his fingers through it. We started walking to class, the usual chatter about last night's game spilling out between us. Edward was the star, as always. But he didn't brag, just shared his thoughts like it was no big deal. I threw in a comment here and there, but mostly I was listening, pretending to be focused on what he was saying instead of how his lips moved when he talked. "So, you coming over later?" Edward asked, nudging me with his elbow. "Yeah, sure," I replied, stuffing my hands into my pockets to keep from doing something stupid like reaching out to touch him. He smiled, and I could feel that familiar warmth spread through me. Dangerous territory. The bell rang, cutting through the moment, and we both headed off to our separate classes. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something big. Something that could either pull us closer together or blow everything apart, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for either. Later that day, we're all sitting in the cafeteria, the usual chaos of lunch swirling around us. I'm picking at my sandwich when I notice Edward's eyes drifting across the room. I follow his gaze and see her. She's gorgeous, no denying it. Tall, blonde, with that confident stride that makes everyone look twice. "She's something, huh?" Edward says, his voice almost dreamy. I swallow hard, forcing a grin. "Yeah, she's great." He doesn't catch the hesitation in my voice, too busy watching her. I'm invisible at this moment, just the guy next to him. I take a bite of my sandwich, trying to focus on anything else, but it's impossible. Every time he looks at her, it's like a knife twisting in my gut. "She's in my team class," Edward adds, still not looking at me. Maybe I should ask her to study together or something. I laugh, though it's forced. "Yeah, sure, go for it." Inside, I'm screaming. It's not the first time I've felt this way, but it's the first time I've had to say the words out loud. I watch as Edward's eyes light up at the idea, and I know I'm in trouble. Big trouble. The bell rings again, and we all start packing up. Edward's already halfway across the room, heading in her direction, while I'm left behind staring at my half-eaten lunch. I want to be happy for him, really, I do. But the truth is, I'm dying a little more every time he talks about her. "Catch you later, man," Edward shouts over his shoulder, not waiting for a reply. "Yeah, later," I mutter, but he's already gone, chasing after Trisha like she's the only thing that matters. And maybe for him, she is. A few days later, we're hanging out in Edward's room, the usual spot. He's sprawled on his bed, flipping through a sports magazine while I'm sitting on the floor, leaning against his desk, pretending to care about the stats he's reading aloud. But my mind's elsewhere, specifically on what he's about to say. "So, I asked Trisha out," Edward blurts out, like it's no big deal. My heart drops, but I keep my face neutral. "Oh yeah, how'd it go?" "She said yes," he says, his excitement barely contained. He tosses the magazine aside and sits up, grinning at me like he just won the lottery. "We're going to that new Italian place on Friday." "That's great, man," I say, my voice steady, though everything inside me feels like it's collapsing. "She's really into you." "Yeah, I think so," he says, almost shyly. I've never seen him like this, nervous, eager. It's a side of him I haven't seen before, and it makes me feel more distant from him than ever. I'm kind of nervous, though. It's my first real date, you know? "Don't sweat it. You'll do fine," I say, forcing a smile. "Just be yourself." He smiles back, relief washing over his face. "Thanks. You're the best. You know that?" "Yeah, I know," I say, trying to sound joking, but the words sting as they leave my mouth. The rest of the night, we keep things light, talking about the game this weekend, school, whatever. But there's a new tension in the air, a shift that I can't ignore. every time Trisha's name comes up. I feel myself pulling back, retreating behind the walls I've built to protect myself. When I finally head home, I replay the conversation in my head over and over. He's happy, and that's what I should want. But the truth is, the more I see him falling for Trisha, the more I see him falling for Trisha, the more I feel like I'm losing him. And I don't know how to stop it. As I lie in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, all I can think about is how things are changing. How we're changing, and how there's nothing I can do to stop it. Friday comes faster than I'd like. Edward is a nervous wreck, pacing around his room while I try to keep it together, offering tips on what to wear, what to say. It's like I'm coaching him on how to break my own heart. "Do I look okay?" he asks, turning to face me, his eyes wide with that vulnerable, almost boyish look that makes it impossible to say anything. But yes. "Yeah, you look great," I reply, my voice a bit too tight, but he doesn't seem to notice. He's too wrapped up in his own excitement. "Wish me luck," he says, grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. "Good luck, man," I say, my smile feeling like it's carved out of stone. I watch him leave, and the moment the door clicks shut, the air in the room feels heavier, suffocating. I sit down on his bed, the space still warm from where he'd been. I pick up the magazine he'd left behind and flip through it absently, trying to distract myself. But it doesn't work. My mind is a storm of jealousy, insecurity, and sadness. Time drags on, every minute feeling like an hour. I can't stop thinking about what's happening right now. Edward and Trisha sitting in that Italian restaurant talking, laughing, maybe even holding hands. The image of them together is like a punch to the gut, and I feel sick just thinking about it. I get up, pacing the room just like Edward did earlier, trying to shake off the feeling that everything is slipping away. But it's no use. The more I think about them, the more I realize how much I hate this. How much I hate that I can't be the one making him laugh, the one he's nervous to impress. Hours later, Edward finally come back, and I'm still there, waiting like a fool. "How'd it go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, but my heart's pounding. "It was amazing," he says, and the glow on his face is unmistakable. "She's incredible. I don't know, man. I just feel like I'm falling for her." I nod, forcing another smile. "That's great, Ed. I'm happy for you." And I am happy that he's happy.
But at the same time, I feel this deep, gnawing emptiness inside, like I'm slowly losing the one person who matters most to me. I keep my face neutral, keep the conversation light, but inside, I'm a mess.
As the night wears on, Edward keeps talking about Trisha. How smart she is, how funny, how beautiful. And I just sit there listening, nodding, pretending that each word isn't another weight pulling me down. When I finally leave, the sky's dark, and I'm more confused than ever. I don't know how long I can keep this up, how long I can pretend that this isn't tearing me apart. All I know is that it hurts more than I ever imagined. The weeks pass, and Edward and Trisha become inseparable. I see less and less of him, and when I do, he's different, distracted, distant, like he's got one foot in our world and the other somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I can't follow. We're sitting in the bleachers after school one day, the two of us, just like old times. But it doesn't feel the same. Edward's got his phone out, texting, his face lit up in that familiar smile. But it's not for me. It's for her. "Sorry, man," he says, slipping the phone back into his pocket. But the apology's half-hearted, more of an afterthought. "No worries," I lie, even though it grates on me. I try to steer the conversation back to something we both enjoy, like the upcoming game or the new movie we've been planning to see, but it's clear his mind is elsewhere. "You still down for that movie this weekend?" I ask, hoping to recapture a bit of what we used to have. Actually, Trisha and I were thinking of going," he says, rubbing the back of his neck, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe we can all go together?" I force a smile. "Yeah, sure, sounds good." But it doesn't sound good. Not at all. It feels like I'm being pushed further into the background, like I'm becoming just another face in the crowd while Trisha takes the spotlight. The worst part is, Edward doesn't even notice. He's too wrapped up in her. The days blur together. Edward's mood swings wildly. One moment he's on cloud nine, the next, he's brooding, unreachable. He snaps at me for no reason, then apologizes immediately, but the damage is done. I can't help but feel like I'm walking on eggshells around him, trying to keep the peace, trying to hold on to the friendship that seems to be slipping through my fingers. Then there's the physical change. Edward, who used to be so put together, starts showing up late, looking tired, unkempt. His usual confidence is replaced by something else, something brittle, almost fragile. "You okay?" I ask one day as we walk home from school. It's a simple question, but it feels loaded, like I'm asking for more than just the answer. "Yeah, just tired," he replies. But there's something in his tone that tells me he's not being entirely honest. He's fidgeting, his hands buried deep in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. Tired or something else. I press, hoping he'll open up. He sighs, finally looking at me. "It's just, they're not as perfect as they seem, you know. She's been acting weird and it's messing with my head." My stomach twists. Part of me wants to comfort him, to tell him it's going to be okay, but another part of me, the selfish part, is almost glad to hear that things aren't perfect. It's a dark, ugly thought, and I hate myself for it. "Maybe you just need to talk to her," I suggest, keeping my tone neutral, supportive. "Figure out what's going on." "Yeah, maybe," he says, but there's no conviction in his voice. We walk the rest of the way in silence, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. I can feel the distance growing, and I don't know how to bridge it. All I know is that Edward is slipping away, and I'm powerless to stop it. By the time we reach his house, he's already back to texting, barely giving me a nod as he heads inside. I stand there for a moment, watching the door close behind him, feeling more alone than ever. As I walk home, I replay the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Edward's not the same, and I'm starting to realize that maybe I'm not either. The friendship we had, it's changing, morphing into something I don't recognize, and I'm terrified of what that means for us. But there's nothing I can do about it. Not right now, anyway. All I can do is wait and hope that whatever's happening to Edward, he'll let me in before it's too late. It's Friday night, and I'm lounging on my couch, a bowl of popcorn in my lap, some mindless show playing on the TV. My phone buzzes. Edward's name flashes on the screen. "Hey man, you home?" His text reads. "Yeah, what's up?" I type back. "Can I come over?" Sure. 15 minutes later, there's a knock. I open the door to find Edward standing there, eyes red, hair disheveled. He looks like he's been through hell. "Jesus, Ed, you okay?" I step aside, letting him in. He walks past me, collapsing onto the couch. I sit next to him, concern gnawing at me. "She cheated on me," he says flatly, staring at the floor. I blink, processing his words. "Trisha, are you sure?" He nods, swallowing hard. "Caught her with that rugby jerk from Benson High. They were." "Shit," I whisper, anger flaring up. "I'm sorry, man." He laughs bitterly. Funny, right? Here I was, thinking we had something real. I place a hand on his shoulder. "She's not worth it." He looks at me, eyes glistening. "Why does it hurt so much?" "Because you cared," I reply softly. He shakes his head, wiping his eyes. I feel like an idiot. "You're not. She's the one who messed up." Silence hangs between us. The TV drones on in the background, but neither of us pays it any mind. "I thought she loved me," he mutters. I squeeze his shoulder. "You deserve better." He turns to me, a vulnerable expression on his face. "Why can't people just be honest?" I shrug, unsure of what to say. He takes a deep breath. "You've always been there for me. Always honest." I feel a lump in my throat. That's what friends are for. He studies me for a moment, an unreadable look in his eyes. Sometimes I wonder, Wonder what? He hesitates, then looks away. Nothing. Forget it. I want to press him, but he seems fragile, like one wrong word could shatter him. Thanks for being here, he says finally. Always, I reply. He leans back, closing his eyes. For a moment, we just sit there, the weight of unspoken words thick in the air. I glance at him, resisting the urge to reach out, to bridge the gap between us. But tonight's not about me. It's about him. And as much as it hurts, I'll be whatever he needs me to be. The next day, Edward's still on my mind. He texted me late last night, just a simple thanks, man. But I could feel the heaviness behind it. I head over to his place, not really knowing what I'll find. When he opens the door, he's a mess. Eyes puffy, hair sticking out in every direction. He's wearing the same clothes as yesterday, and I can tell he hasn't slept much, if at all. Hey, I say, keeping my voice light, but the concern seeps through. Hey, he replies, stepping aside to let me in. His room is a wreck. Clothes tossed everywhere. His bed unmade. It's nothing like the usual neat and organized space I'm used to. He flops onto the bed, face buried in his pillow. Rough night? I ask, sitting on the edge of the bed. Yeah, he mumbles, voice muffled by the pillow. I don't know what to say, so I just sit there, offering silent support. After a moment, he turns his head to look at me, eyes red and tired. I can't stop thinking about it, he admits, his voice raw. Every time I close my eyes, I see them together. I nod, understanding. It's gonna hurt for a while, Ed, but you'll get through it. He sighs, rolling onto his back, staring up at the ceiling. Why does it feel like I'm the only one who ever gets hurt? You're not, I say quietly. It just feels that way right now. He closes his eyes, and I can see the tension in his face, the pain etched into every line. I want to help, but I know there's only so much I can do. Still, I can't just sit here and watch him suffer. Come on, I say, standing up and grabbing his arm. Let's get out of here. He looks at me, confused. Where? Anywhere but here. You need a break. He hesitates, then nods. Yeah, okay. We head out, no real destination in mind, just walking. The cool air seems to clear his head a bit, and he starts talking about anything and everything like he's trying to distract himself. I let him, chiming in here and there, but mostly just listening. Eventually, we end up at the park, sitting on a bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Edward's been quieter the last few minutes, lost in his thoughts. I don't know what I'd do without you, he says suddenly, his voice soft. You don't have to worry about that, I reply, trying to keep my tone light. But there's a seriousness to my words that I can't hide. He turns to me, and for a moment, there's something in his eyes. Something vulnerable, raw. But then he looks away, shaking his head. I just wish things were different, he mutters. Yeah, I say, not really knowing what he means, but feeling the weight of his words. Me too. The silence stretches out between us, not uncomfortable, just. There. I want to say more, to tell him that he's not alone, that I'm here, always have been, always will be. But the words stick in my throat, and I can't bring myself to break the moment. Eventually, he stands up, stretching. We should head back. Yeah, I agree, though I'm not sure either of us really wants to leave. As we walk back, the tension between us eases a bit. He's not better, not yet, but he's getting there. And I'll be there, every step of the way, until he is. That night, after we get back from the park, I hang around at Edward's place longer than usual. He doesn't seem to mind, and honestly, I don't want to leave him alone. We're sitting on the couch in his living room, the TV on, but neither of us is really watching. It's more about the company, the silence between us filled with unspoken words. At some point, Edward shifts closer, his shoulder brushing against mine. It's such a small thing, but it feels like everything. The air between us changes, charged with something I can't quite name. I glance over at him, and he's already looking at me, those green eyes of his darker in the dim light. Thanks for today, he says, his voice low, almost hesitant. Anytime, I reply, my heart thudding in my chest. I try to keep my voice steady, casual, but I'm not sure I succeed. He doesn't say anything for a moment, just keeps looking at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he leans in, and before I can fully process what's happening, his lips are on mine. It's not what I expected. There's no hesitation, no awkwardness. It's soft, tentative at first, like he's testing the waters. But then he deepens the kiss and I'm lost. Everything I've been holding back, all the feelings I buried for so long come rushing to the surface. When we finally pull back, we're both breathing hard, our foreheads resting together. I'm too stunned to speak, and I can see the same shock in his eyes. Ed, I start, but cuts me off, shaking his head. I don't know what this means, he says, his voice shaky. I needed that. I needed you. I'm reeling, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. But there's one thing that cuts through all of it, one thing that I can't ignore. I've wanted that for so long, I admit, words slipping out before I can stop them. He pulls back slightly, searching my face. You have? Yeah, I say, my voice barely a whisper. But I didn't think you felt the same. I don't know what I feel, he says, running a hand through his hair, his frustration clear. Everything's so messed up right now, but when I'm with you, it's different. It's like you're the only thing that makes sense. I reach out, taking his hand in mine. You don't have to figure it all out right now. We don't have to label this or make any big decisions. Just let's take it one step at a time. He looks down at our joined hands, then back up at me, and I see a flicker of hope in his eyes. One step at a time, he repeats, nodding slightly. We sit there for a while longer, neither of us saying much, just holding on to each other. It's a fragile piece, one that could shatter with the wrong word, but it's also real, more real than anything I've felt in a long time. Eventually, the exhaustion of the day catches up to us, and we end up lying on the couch together, his head resting on my chest. As his breathing evens out, I stay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that's happened. This is a turning point. I can feel it. But where it's turning, I have no idea. All I know is that, for the first time in forever, I don't feel so alone. And maybe, just maybe, Edward feels the same way too. The next morning, I wake up with Edward still curled up against me, his head on my chest. For a second, I don't move, just letting the moment sink in. It feels surreal, like stepping into a dream I've had 1,000 times but never dared to believe could be real. He stirs, slowly blinking his eyes open, and for a moment, there's a flash of confusion before reality settles in. He looks up at me, and I can see the mixture of emotions in his eyes. Uncertainty, fear, but also something softer, something warm. Morning, I say quietly, trying to keep the tone light, like everything's normal. Morning, he replies, his voice still thick with sleep. We lie there in silence, the weight of what happened last night hanging in the air between us. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say, how to navigate this new territory we've stumbled into. But Edward's the first to break the quiet. About last night. He starts, but then hesitates, biting his lip. I swallow hard, trying to keep my voice steady. We don't have to talk about it if you're not ready. He shakes his head. No, I want to. I don't know what it means. I don't want to mess things up between us. You won't, I say, more confident than I feel. We'll figure it out. He sits up slightly, still close, and for a moment I think he's going to pull away. But instead he surprises me. He leans in, pressing his lips to mine again. More sure this time, more intentional. It's not just a kiss, it's a decision, a step forward into something we both know is risky, but also something neither of us can ignore. When he pulls back, he looks at me with those green eyes that have always had the power to undo me. I've never felt this way before, he admits, his voice barely above a whisper. Not with anyone. Me neither, I confess, my heart pounding. But I'm here. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. He nods, a small, almost shy smile pulling at his lips. Okay? For the rest of the morning, we stay close, talking quietly, exploring this new dynamic between us. It's strange, but it's also, right? Like this is where we were always meant to end up, even if neither of us saw it coming. At some point, he gets up to make breakfast, and I watch him move around the kitchen, a sense of calm settling over me. The easy banter between us is back, but there's something more now, an undercurrent of something deeper, something unspoken. We eat together, the conversation light, but every now and then our eyes meet, and there's a spark there, a connection that wasn't there before. It's new, it's fragile, but it's real. As we clean up, he suddenly turns to me, a more serious look in his eyes. This isn't just a one-time thing, right? He asks, his voice careful, like he's afraid of the answer. I step closer, reaching out to take his hand. Not for me, I say, holding his gaze. But we don't have to rush. We can take it slow, see where it goes. He squeezes my hand, relief washing over his face.
Yeah, I'd like that.
And just like that, we're in uncharted territory, navigating feelings neither of us fully understands, but both of us are willing to explore. It's scary, sure, but it's also exciting. For the first time in a long time, I feel like we're heading in the right direction, even if the path is uncertain. As the day wears on, we fall back into our usual routine, but there's a difference now, a closeness, a new layer to our friendship that's as thrilling as it is terrifying. And as we settle in for the night, I realize that whatever happens next, we're in it together. And for now, that's enough. The weekend passes in a blur of quiet moments and unspoken feelings. Edward and I spend most of it together, but there's this underlying tension, like we're both waiting for the other shoe to drop. By Sunday evening, the reality of what happened between us starts to settle in, and with it, a flood of doubts. We're sitting in his room, the sun setting outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The TV is on, but neither of us is paying attention. Edward is leaning against the headboard, and I'm next to him, close but not touching. The silence is heavy, filled with everything we haven't said yet. He finally breaks the silence. So, what happens now? I turn to him, trying to read his expression, but it's guarded, unsure. I admit, I guess we just keep going. See where this takes us? He nods slowly, but I can tell he's not fully convinced. But what if? What if it doesn't work? What if it changes everything? It already has, I say softly, not wanting to sugarcoat it. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. He looks down at his hands, fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. I'm just scared. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I reply, more firmly this time. We're in this together, remember. We'll figure it out. He gives me a small smile, but it doesn't reach his eyes. It's just, I've never done this before. I don't know how to be this. Neither do I say, reaching out to take his hand. But we don't have to have all the answers right now. We just take it one step at a time, like we said. He squeezes my hand, and for a moment it feels like everything might actually be okay. But then he pulls away, standing up and pacing the room. I'm supposed to see Trisha tomorrow, he says, almost like he's talking to himself. She wants to talk. My chest tightens at the mention of her name. Do you want to? He stops, turning to face me. I don't know. Part of me feels like I need closure, but another part of me just wants to forget she ever existed. I nod, understanding the conflict he's feeling. Do what feels right for you, Ed. Whatever you need, I'm here. He sighs, running a hand through his hair. I just don't want to mess this up. Us. You won't, I assure him, though I can't deny the knot of anxiety tightening in my own stomach. We'll get through it. He doesn't respond right away, just stares out the window, lost in thought. I can see the weight of everything pressing down on him. Trisha, us, the future, it's a lot, and I don't have all the answers. I wish I could make it easier for him, but I know this is something he has to work through on his own. Finally, he turns back to me, a resigned look on his face. I guess we'll see what happens. Yeah, I agree, though the uncertainty in his voice echoes in my own heart. We'll see. That night, I leave his place feeling more conflicted than ever. On one hand, I'm glad we finally crossed that line, that we're exploring something that's been brewing between us for so long. But on the other hand, I can't shake the feeling that we're standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could either bring us closer or tear us apart. As I walk home, I replay the weekend in my mind. The kiss, the moments of vulnerability, the quiet confessions. It's all so new, so fragile, and I can't help but wonder what comes next. There's a part of me that's hopeful, that believes we can make this work. But there's also a part that's terrified of losing him, of everything changing, of what we might become. When I finally get into bed, I stare at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone buzzes on the nightstand. Another text from Edward. Good night, it says, simple but with so much left unsaid. Good night, I reply, hesitating before adding, we'll figure it out. I put the phone down, hoping that he finds some comfort in those words, even if I'm not entirely sure I believe them myself. The path ahead is unclear, and all I can do is hope that whatever happens, we'll find our way through it, together,